Nine Princes in Amber is a 1970 fantasy novel written by famous American author Roger Zelazney. He's known for his fantasy and sci-fi works. This book is the first in a 10-part series known as the Chronicles of Amber, which was written over a period of 20 years. It's set halfway between the real world, planet Earth, and the magical world of Amber. The plot follows an amnesiac prince as he seeks to return to the world of Amber and depose one of his brothers as king and to claim his rightful birthright to the crown. In 2023, it was announced that Stephen Colbert was involved in bringing the Chronicles of Amber to film or either a show as an executive producer, so stay tuned for news about that. The novel is rated 4 stars out of 5 on Goodreads, a score that was accumulated from over 57,000 ratings, so it's a well-known book. Zelazney was the son of Polish immigrants, and he worked on writing projects throughout his bachelor's degree and master's degree, and he became a very famous American author. He died relatively young at the age of 58 from cancer, but his science fiction and his fantasy is considered some of the best to come out of the United States. Nine Princes in Amber features Prince Corwin as the main protagonist, and readers follow his journey from Earth to Amber and all of the realms in between as he maneuvers complicated political relationships with his 8 royal brothers and 5 royal sisters, each of whom have their own motivations for the crown. Corwin is just as confused about the world as readers are from the start, as he awakens in a hospital with no memory of who he is or how he arrived there, which I found to be a decently clever plot device that allows readers to learn about the universe and the world of Amber in an organic fashion as he learns about it, without large exposition dumps slowing down the story. Corwin learns that he has an adversarial relationship with several of his siblings, primarily Prince Eric, who is currently in Amber to crown himself king after the disappearance of their father, King Oberon. And Corwin's primary ally is his brother, who's named Random, and Random guides him in both recovering his own memory as well as re-entering the world of Amber. Corwin also allies with another brother named Blaze, and together they mount an assault on Prince Eric at the capital city of Amber. Blaze apparently dies, and Corwin is imprisoned for 3 years, after which a wizard helps him escape, and there ends the story. The world of Amber and the realms that exist in the shadowy spaces between Amber and planet Earth contain their own creatures and lore, but they are described with minimal detail by Zelazney. So, for example, creatures are described as either red or hairy, and the reader is left to really fill in all the blanks using their own imagination to flesh out all of those details. It is a magical world, so magic is inherent there, but it's mostly clearly used by the royal siblings through sets of these magical cards. So you will not see Dungeons and Dragons or video game style use of magic here. The world is not modern, but it's not exactly ancient either. There are medieval flavors, so medieval devices of battle and travel are common, but the lore, I think, definitely has allowed for the possibility of futuristic tech. I'm saying that based just on the very first book. I don't know anything about the lore of the following 9 books, but I would not be surprised if it moved in that direction. The characters are pretty unusual, including Corwin, and the flavor of this book is similar to that of something like Game of Thrones or other stories about royal drama. What sets this book apart from Game of Thrones, though, and other books that I've read, is Zelazney's prose. He has a really strange writing style, not only in this, but in other books that I've read, and it oscillates between giving lots of detail to very scarce details. So scenes that are described in very clear and minute details and significant plot points are described either in one sentence, or he takes 4 pages to describe those scenes. And so that attention to detail is good when it happens, and that's why the scenes where it doesn't happen are kind of jarring. So for instance, at one point during Corwin's quest with Blaze, Zelazney describes a scene that could have taken a whole chapter or even been its own novel. Blaze kills this huge tiger, and it's in the midst of this battle, but Zelazney basically boils it down to one sentence. And so the scarcity of detail, I think, will be more welcome to some people. Some readers of fantasy really want all the details. They want all the creatures described. They want to know the details of the food and the clothing. And some fantasy readers are more like me, and that they just want the story to get on with it so they can fill in the blanks with their own imagination. This story hovers about around 120 pages, but it covers material that could have easily filled a book, 5 times this volume. He wastes no time, and the story feels like it's over really before it even begins. It gives the work a kind of strange feeling, but it's not totally unpleasant. The prose feels closer to an old world poem or an old world narrative more than a modern day fantasy bestseller type of prose. The pacing is very fast, and that may be because the story was originally published in magazines with limited space over several editions. And so I think that the very fast pacing of this book and the kind of strange, archaic prose makes it more suitable as an audiobook than a printed one. And there are also hints throughout the story that the book is dated to the 1970s. He uses several 70s type anachronistic phrases, and the characters also smoke a lot of cigarettes, which is kind of another tip that, hey, maybe this is a dated book. Whereas you don't see that kind of datedness in other works like Lord of the Rings. So lastly, I want to discuss some of the tropes of the book. Tropes are not necessarily positive or negative. They're just something that's fun to notice in a work of literature, especially in fantasy to me. The first is that there are several plot devices involving sleep, of all things. The first trope is called the "you wake up in a room" trope, kind of hearkening back to D&D conversation where your characters are suddenly meeting in a bar. You meet in a bar. Well, this trope says you wake up in a room, and the story begins as someone wakes up. That's what happens here. And as I mentioned earlier, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's okay if it happens once. But my issue is that throughout the story, Zelazney uses sleep tropes for awkward scene transitions. It's like if he doesn't know how to end a scene, the character is either just knocked out or they go to sleep because they're tired. I don't know if there's a name for a trope like that, but it was kind of distracting once I noticed it. Other tropes that I noticed involved Prince Corwin himself. There is, of course, the Prince Charming trope and the heir to the throne motifs. Having a prince fighting for his rightful birthright on the throne is not totally original, and that's okay, but I really found myself hoping that Corwin would turn out to be the bad guy, which is much less predictable. The story begins with a blank slate, so I think Zelazney could have done that well. Another weakness is the way that armies, I think, are treated here. They're described as being totally loyal to Corwin and Blaze, but we never meet any people from those armies individually, and they all unquestioningly die in vain without question, which it felt very unrealistic. It makes for great storytelling for children, but it's less realistic for adult readers. There are also other tropes that were actually subverted in a positive way. One of the brothers wears white armor, so he's a white knight, and he's actually this very aggressive, bellicose warrior, which is contrary to the way that white knights are usually portrayed in fantasy. And Corwin is often portrayed with green and black armor and robes, which are usually associated with evil and dark magic, which is why I was really hoping that Zelazney would lean that direction. So I was kind of surprised when he turned out to actually be a very wholesome, good protagonist. In conclusion, I think Nine Princes in Amber is a quick, light novel. It gives readers an experience unlike other contemporary fantasy novels. It has all those classic hallmarks of epic fantasy, but his abbreviated style and prose, it forces the readers to use their imagination and do most of the heavy lifting in the process of world building. So for all of these reasons in this review, I give Nine Princes in Amber 4 stars out of 5.